everyone. Welcome to this week's episode on Laidback, the Zinga podcast. And our topic for this week is why investors reject your startup before the pitch. It is your brand. And our guest for this week is Euan Lockwood. Euan is the founder of KEF, which is a studio that is focused on brand strategy and positioning. And it helps startups to actually improve their visual identity and digital experience. Hello, Euan. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Rizzo.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Same here. But I start off with the same question all the time, and so I'm going to ask you the same question again. Is this your first time on a podcast?
It is, yeah.
In a studio?
I'm a podcast virgin.
Oh, really?
Absolutely, in every single way, yeah.
Fair enough. So what are your expectations since this is your first time on a podcast then?
I had no expectations, to be honest. It's an amazing setup, so I'm taking it all in. Yeah.
Fair enough. But let's start off by actually defining what a brand in the context of startups actually mean. When we say brand, what does that really mean?
Lots of people have lots of different ideas. Some people think it's the logo or the visual identity.
Yeah.
But really, I think of brand as an iceberg. So you have the things that are above the surface. So that is your logo is like the pinnacle.
Yeah.
It's the identifying mark of the brand. Then you've got your wider visual identity, and that comes out in things like your website, your social media, all those sorts of things. But underneath the surface, the things that you don't see, these are things like your purpose, your mission, your vision, your values, the things that are the visual identity that the top side rests upon. So brand is all of that. And if you don't have the elements underneath the surface, the elements above the surface are a little bit precarious. So it's worth thinking about brand as not just how it looks, but actually what's the experience that you're giving your customers, your audience.
And the storytelling as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh. So do colors, or I know you've mentioned the logo, but the colors actually matter as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, colors come into the visual identity, and it's ultimately a brand is about connecting with your target audience. So you're going to have, you might be in certain industries where there are expectations around the colors that a brand has because of the industry it's in. Sometimes you want to align with those expectations. Sometimes you might want to disrupt that industry. So you might use color as a way to do that, to come at it a completely different angle. So colors is a really important thing. The whole psychology around colors. Blue is a very high sort of trust color.
Really?
If you see a lot of customer service operations will have blues a sort of key thing.
Is it light blue or dark blue, or any shade of blue?
Just blue. I think a darker blue, a bit more classic, a bit more trusting. Yeah. So there's all sorts of psychology involved in just colors as part of branding.
So when we talk about branding now, we've talked about colors, we've talked about logo, we've talked about the website, the social media handles and the stories that tell on social media, everything in general. So at what point do you think investors actually form an opinion or impression of a founder or a startup?
I guess as soon as you're on their radar. And so I go down to London most months to startup events, and there are always founders who are looking to pitch their ideas to funders, to angel investors, and so on. There's always investors there as well. And listening to some of the conversations that happened there, investors you might have a great idea, but a lot of the time investors are investing in the person, the founder or the co-founders, because actually they see something in them that it could be anything that they're involved with, but they're backing them. And I think that's quite a key thing. So even just the branding of the founder and how they're coming across before they've even talked about their startup is a key thing. But for startups generally and things to think about around their brand, it might just be your sort of 20-second quick elevator pitch as to how you position yourself, what you offer, and the type of experience you can give your audience.
But based on what you just mentioned, he did mention that most of the angel investors actually invest in the founder, the person, more than they actually invest in the startup. So the branding and everything is important. So how often do you think these angel investors actually decide we are not interested in Euan? For example, you are the founder. We're not really interested in this person before they even make the pitch.
It's a difficult one to answer. I think they get a sense of whether there's a good idea, but also how someone carries themselves
Comes
off.
across, yeah.
Yeah, if you might. I'm trying to think of my experience of seeing founders pitch. Sometimes they've never pitched before, so they might be nervous, they might stutter, they might, there might be all sorts of hurdles and problems in the way, and an investor will see past that because actually they see something of, this person's good at executing or good at shipping on the idea that they have, or have been able to tap into. Not something that's just trendy, but into a current situation where there's an opportunity. I guess that's what they're looking for. They're looking for opportunities for them to invest their money and ultimately get a return, but to build something that's going to go the distance with them. Yeah.
But are there actually signals these investors actually use to actually judge credibility early? Because, for example, it could be somebody who's really smart.
Yeah.
They have a great idea, but they're not good at pitching.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Then, what signal do you think these investors can actually use to say, okay, you know what, let's judge the credibility of this founder, and I think he's going somewhere? Are there signals they actually use? Or would you link it back to branding?
I think there's a mix, because I think there's a relational element ultimately, and branding ultimately there's a relational element. If you look at, if we talk about branding more broadly, there's various definitions of what branding is, but one well-known definition is it's the gut feeling that people have about your product, your service, your company, or brand.
Yeah.
So it's, I like to do an exercise with people where I get people to close their eyes and think of, what's a brand that you love. You're not necessarily thinking about the logo. You're not thinking about the color scheme. You're thinking about actually how it makes you feel. It might be something that you've experienced, or it might be more aspirational. So there's an emotive. It touches on our emotions, branders, and in that context of relationship, people don't build relationships with organizations, but branding helps position them and give them personality as if they were people, and that's, a successful brand creates a personality around it. So I think the relationship between the investor and a founder, say they'll look for maybe signals, like you say, around actually this person's open to change, maybe, because often you'll know the deal with a startup might pivot a number of times before they actually find their sweet spot as to what they're pursuing. So they're looking for not just someone fixed to a very rigid idea and unwilling to be flexible around that. I think there's different qualities of a founder that I'm sure investors, where they have a bit of a track record, they'll be able to see those indicators in those people. And I think a big part of it is investors will want to get to know, if they see something that they like, they'll want to then get to know that founder. So it's not just about having one pitching meeting, that's it, we're going to invest seed funding in you. There'll be a meetup, there'll be a get to know you phase, and that's quite a key thing. So that has to be a good fit. Again, it comes back to this relational side of things. Is the investor a good fit for the founder, and vice versa?
So do you think these investors actually look up the founders online before meeting them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, because like you mentioned, there are so many qualities they may be looking for, but I don't think they'll find those qualities online. Or do they? I don't know. Like, what do you think they're looking for?
I think online they're looking for, you're maybe looking for more surface markers. So it's your LinkedIn profile is an obvious one, isn't it? So what experiences have you got as a founder? It might be that this is you're a first time founder, so it could be you're straight out of school, straight out of university, or you've had you've had a 20-year career and you've happened upon an idea that you're just starting to look at and start to develop. So I think them understanding something of your journey. So the founder's story is really important. I meet a lot of founders who they often are, that their startup is scratching an itch that they have. So it's from their own experience. So in some ways there's an authenticity around that, because they're not just looking for the next big thing. They're coming at it from a place of empathy. So I think there's that sense of being able to see an opportunity, but also have something of that founder's own journey and story in that. Is really key. And you can do that, through your social media posts, what you put out there online. There's different ways, and from making it very clear what you're about, who you're targeting. We talk about logos and colors, but also there's tone of voice. There's it's how you come across from a verbal branding perspective. So being able to be consistent with what you're talking about, so that actually people understand really quickly what it is that you're about.
So, but the founders, like you mentioned, that the investors can actually look you up and look at it, like we mentioned, LinkedIn is the obvious one. So, but do you think, because I would say, I may be wrong, you are the brand strategy GCS, so I may be wrong. So because I would feel that LinkedIn is like the founder's personal brand, which is a bit different from the company.
Absolutely.
Or do you think the personal brand of the founder and the startup, they go hand in hand? Is there an overlap, or do you think they actually focus on the personal branding of the founder at that point?
I think it could be a mix of any of those. I think there's always an overlap. Often, if depending on what stage the startup's in, if you're just trying to get that first round of seed funding, I think more and more the personal brand you represent, that's you're probably doing all you can to try and land that funding, as well as develop the product. So your personal brand is very key. As your startup matures, as it goes into different stages, it might be less about your personal brand, but you're more about and it's how you I think a key thing that I see and that I hear from investors as well. There's an investor down in London called Sam Simpson. He runs a bit of a startup program investing portal, and he talked about first-time investors focus on product, second-time investors focus on distribution. The distribution is your branding as a foundation, your marketing, your sales. First-time founders, all they're looking at is the product. They've got this great idea. It could be a really good idea, but if there's no distribution, it comes to nothing. So this idea that you even though you might be at an early stage with your startup and have a great idea, if you don't begin to think about the startup's branding, you're off to a bad start, really. And it's like spinning plates. You've still got to focus on the product. You've still got to focus on the team. You've still got to focus on customer acquisition. But within that mix, you've still got to focus on brand. So if you don't, you'll quite often, or not quite often, I'd say, if you've got a better product with poor branding, you'll be beaten every time by a poorer product with better branding, because branding is all about the connection that you're making with your audience. So I think there's real need for founders to, even if they're just doing not the bare bones, but have an understanding of what they're about. I was speaking to is the chief strategy officer of Alaka Bank at an event down in London, Conrad Ford, and he's got a history of getting to hyper growth startup stage with, I think this Alaka Bank is his third endeavor that he's been part of. And I asked him the question of, think about startups branding, what should they focus on? And he said the key thing for him was the personality. So if
the founder?
No, the personality of the brand. So if you can think about, if you can get people to think about the brand as a person, they'll connect with it more. There'll be a sense of it less being like an organization and more like a friend, or that type of thing. So that might look like tone of voice might be how cheeky they are, or how professional they are, or there's different ways that you can communicate a personality. So I think a really good thing, if founders just think about the personality of their startup, that's a good place to start. Obviously things like your purpose, your mission, vision, your values, those are all good things too. But to make if your brand, this is a good exercise. If your brand was a shoe, what type of shoe would it be? Would it be a quality Doc Marten boot because actually it's robust and it doesn't matter what conditions are underfoot, it can deal with them all? Or is it something more refined, like a sprinter's trainer that's engineered to perfection to achieve absolute maximum results? So it's doing these exercises just help brands think it, or help startups think about what the personality of their brand could be before you get into any of the colors or the logo or anything like that. These are the sort of foundation things that they can think about. And even for themselves as well, you've got, what are you about? If you could describe yourself in 2 words, as a sort of, how do you sum yourself up in that way? Because every person brings something unique to the startup that they have, and that's your personal branding that you can lean into the weird, lean into the things that are a little bit oddball, because it's about being able to being sort of seen throughout a crowd. What causes you to stand out in that. So it's always good to sort of spend a little bit of time focusing on that type of thing.
But talking about the foundation and the different stages of the startups that you mentioned. So assuming, let's use a case study now. We have an early startup, right? So what do you think is more important? Is it branding or traction?
When you say traction, do you mean with customers or
customers? Customers and online presence. Because if they have online presence, then maybe the investors will feel like, okay, now they have people they can actually reach. Right. So what do you think is more important? Do you think it's the branding or?
Well, I think branding
or the traction.
I think branding precedes traction. If you look at, there's that general advice of build a community before you build a product or a thing, because then you've got people that are their pain points, the things they're struggling with, and you can shape your product around those and know that you've already got a community that are ready for this because you've fed into that. So if you're building a community, what are they gathering around, or who are they gathering around? So this is where branding comes into it. So if you're I'm working with a health tech startup at the moment. We're going through the brand strategy exercise at the moment, and it's coming from a place of their own need, and they're already speaking to similar people with similar problems, asking them their experiences, and as we're doing that, they haven't necessarily created the product as yet. They're building traction at the same time as they're building their brand, because the brand really is just, who are we? What are we about? Why do we do what we do beyond the financial side of things? What's the core reason? Absolutely. So it's a bit of a mix. I think you need branding to be able to connect, but also,
and then get the traction.
That traction comes from that, and you start to understand. Once you start to understand the pain points of your audience and can speak into those pain points in a way that they feel heard and understood, and actually these guys are on my side, that's a really powerful proposition. And it from a positioning point of view, it gives you a very powerful place to not necessarily to sell into, but to just provide and serve as a solution to those problems, because you've already built the trust, because you've been listening to them. So it's always speak to your audience, always understand, and keep on digging, find the real problem that they're actually facing that you can actually solve.
But taking it back to what you said earlier about investors and how they are actually trying as much as possible to narrow down on a particular quality. Maybe they end up searching the founder on LinkedIn and other websites to actually look at their personal brand. And then, like you said, as the startup actually goes into the later stages and other stages, they start looking at the company brand in itself. So, and I'm guessing two qualities out of all the qualities they could be looking at should be competence and trustworthiness. Because nobody wants to lose their money. And they want to work with somebody who knows what he or she is doing. Right? So how do you think, I know you've mentioned the color blue, but how do you think a brand can communicate at least these two particular qualities,
Yeah.
trustworthiness and competence?
Yeah. I think competence should be implicit in what you're doing. And I think, this isn't a startup story. This was, a business that had been going for a number of years in the securities sector.
Yeah.
And one of the things, this is probably about 6 years ago, I heard this. The owner of the company says, people assume we can do the job because we're in business, and that's like the base level thing. So then what comes onto that is the signals around trust. So are our engineers polite when they go on site? Do they leave the place tidy? So you're looking at differentiators compared to competitors that signal elements around trust, that and just how you do things. So I think the competence side of things, people will find you out very quickly if you aren't good. If you can't do what you're stating that you'll do. I think even more so in today's very quick turnaround, people will drop you very quickly. Our attention spans are so small nowadays, and I think that tracks across. People can get fed up if they're not feeling like you're delivering what you said you'll deliver. So I think competence should be implicit. I think then it's how do you differentiate through trust indicators such as building confidence into what you do.
BetterHelp is the paid partner of this episode. Growing up in Nigeria, mental health was not discussed in our homes. As a man, you are discouraged from showing your emotions, as this is seen as a sign of weakness. If this resonates with you, you are not alone. About 62% of adults believe that societal attitudes stop them from seeking mental health support when they need one. And that's why I've teamed up with BetterHelp to stop the stigma around mental health and encourage you to seek mental health support from credentialed therapists when you need one. These credentialed therapists listen, ask questions, and help you to see things from new perspectives in order to improve your life. BetterHelp is on a mission to help you start therapy as easy as possible. If this is something you're interested in, click on the link below or go to betterhelp.com/laidback to match with a credentialed therapist in as little as a couple of days. You can also get 10% off your first month by using my link or the code Laidback. So I'm guessing weak branding actually destroys confidence of the investor in the startup and the founder, right? So what are the common branding mistakes startups actually make that actually kills investor confidence?
I think common mistakes, not even having a brand. So more and more, certainly, early stage seed funded, maybe pre-seed startups, they'll have a logo that's been done by AI or they've done it themselves. They won't really have visual identity. They might have a couple of colors. They might have a website, but there's no brand as such. They've got a logo. They've got a color scheme. Now I get a lot of people want to move quickly, so it's just okay. Let's just get something in place, and sometimes that's absolutely fine. But if you're looking to build trust, if you're looking to build a sense of we know what we're doing in this thing and build connection, working on just some of the foundational stuff, brand strategy is really important to see that, because otherwise you could just pick a logo out of the air and it's like, well, that's our branding. So that I'd say that's a big mistake, not actually focusing on branding at all, or thinking they've done their branding when actually they've just got a logo. They paid, they've gone to Fiverr and paid someone $5 for something that could be any sort of logo for any startup anywhere. I think one of the other ones is not thinking beyond the branding. So I said about distribution, first time founders don't really, they focus in so much on the product, they don't think about distribution. Branding is the basis of your marketing campaigns, and obviously sales follows on from that. So having thoughts as to what happens once you've launched, I heard a story of a marketing owner of a marketing company saying they had I think it was a gym. They'd spent quite a lot of time on their sort of visual identity, on their venue, on all the equipment, so it looked amazing. Then they opened and no one came in because they hadn't thought about what happens after we launch. They hadn't thought about marketing, hadn't really got any sort of strategy of distribution. So not thinking beyond the product is a big thing. Thinking that you've got a brand when you don't have a brand, doing it yourself. That's obviously I would say that because I have a branding studio, but I think there's an element of you do have to maybe wear lots of hats as a founder. But where can you get, even if it's someone that who's got some understanding of brand that can maybe help you out. So almost like trying to do it all yourself, I think might be another thing. As your brand, as your startup grows, it's really important that you're able to allow people to make decisions when you're not in the room. That's culture, effectively. Yeah. So if you're holding on at an early stage, you're then going to struggle later on, and I think that will be a bottleneck. You become that bottleneck in the startup. So those are a few things.
But it's because you mentioned the product, right? And then you talked about distribution and marketing.
Yeah.
Right? Because I've seen this firsthand.
Yeah.
I've seen technically smart and sound people. They are really, really smart.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes they focus so much on the product.
Yeah.
Because they feel like they know what they're doing. So what are you saying?
Yeah.
Why is it that they often underestimate branding? Because when you talk to them, you are trying to explain, I don't think this thing you used here is actually good for your image on social media or what. You know what you're doing, but you need to come across to others in a better way.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't really want to listen to that.
Yeah.
Why do you think those technically strong or smart founders, why do you think they often underestimate branding?
I think they underestimate branding because they think their product will carry the whole thing. So it's that misconception of if we build it, they'll come. So far from the truth. Yeah, no one knows about you.
Yeah.
So and you have founders, and maybe more technically focused founders will just keep on, even building features that without speaking to customers. So there's almost, I don't want to say an arrogance about it, but there's maybe a sort of a narrow focus that becomes its own echo chamber, and then they assume that because they think they've got a good idea, good product, that everyone else will just automatically know about it and swarm to become a buyer, or customer or user. So I think there's a little bit of that narrow focus. And I think that goes back to what this investor said. Second time founders focus on distribution. They've been through that experience, so actually they know.
They've realized their mistakes.
Yeah. And it's not to say you don't develop an amazing product. You just need to do those, the spin of the different plates at the same time. You've got to level each thing up all at once, which is a real challenge.
For a lot of people.
Yeah.
So going back to these technically strong founders.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's not focus so much on them, but I'm just saying brands in general. Are there certain things brands or startups will do that will unintentionally scream like they are an amateur to investors or the general public out there without even knowing?
Yeah, so I think AI logos. People are tuned into AI because we're having to, as AI gets better. One of the things, if you're putting out content, let's say on social media, on LinkedIn, when people are scanning through their feeds, the first thing they used to say is this for me? So to stop the scroll, you've got to, the first thing that the person that's scrolling has got to work out is this for me? So when someone's doing that, they'll only stop if they feel this might be for them. And that's the first gate that you've got to go through. Nowadays, there's a gate before that now called, that says, "Is this real?" We like some of the sort of entertaining side of AI. I think we're okay with, but increasingly we're a little bit suspicious of, is this talking head video? Is this real, or is this someone's put a little bit of video and their voice, their audio into some AI app, and it's created that. So there's this skepticism around things around AI and how people come across. So I think being able to just show up I don't like using the word, but authentically, it's an overused word, but I think maybe being able to show yourself as genuine. I think this is where personal brand comes into it, because you've almost got this channel alongside your startup's brand to champion, one, to reveal something of who you are as a startup founder, as people buy into people, and something of your journey, but then also be able to sort of big up what you're doing in the startup, and maybe show some of the behind the scenes side of things that are going on, and just be quite real about it. So I think that's so AI is something that screams is a big no. I think desperation as well. I think about this in any business, where what's the cost of getting leads or opportunities if people see you as desperate. So if it's very salesy, if it's very if it feels like there's, I don't know, if it's too good to be true, almost like this brand. So I think brand promise comes into this. So if people are a little bit suspicious as to whether you can deliver on what you're saying, you've got to be so careful that you can deliver on what you're saying. Like we were saying before, this competence element. So just being able to, I guess, admit when you've got things wrong. And I think for startups, they pivot, or can pivot so often, that is it possible to leave customers behind a little bit because of you're trying to find a fit for your startup, and work a way that's going to ultimately allow it to grow and become what it is that you want it to be now. So I think just being honest with people, and allowing that sense of connection to remain strong, with the people in your audience and your ideal customer profile. And I think that comes down to culture. So people can perceive culture. That happens internally. If you think about, a startup might grow quite quickly. How do you maintain the right culture? I think that starts with brands, because it's about your values. It's about your about the mission that you have, that you're calling people into. That's a very internal thing. Also, people will see it from the outside. In the news, last few days, you've got Brewdog, who they've just sold to a private equity firm, or sold out to a firm for 33 million. They were supposedly worth £1 billion, at the height of things. And a big part of what has caused that decline, apart from, by the sounds of it, unhelpful decisions, was just that poor culture internally. So, and then that reputation that then leaked from the internal to the external. So there was a disconnect between actually this is them saying this is who we are versus actually how they were, which obviously had a huge impact. They've shed hundreds of jobs, and not by one of the founders in his own sort of admission, not the best ways. And so culture is a really key element to making sure you are what you say you are. If people see that as a disconnect, that's a big no. Yeah.
So talking about authenticity, right? What about copying other brands? Do you think that holds credibility?
Depends what you mean by copying. I think if we're talking going back to the logo thing, or you see that often, and there's always someone's rebranded. I remember when Airbnb rebranded years ago to their sort of current stylized A, and there was a whole load of online hate in the design community because actually there's quite a few brands that have that similar sort of logo mark. So I always think there's nothing new under the sun, but it's how you adapt things in a way that you can then own and position in a unique way. I think I think copying from maybe more of a strategic perspective is not a bad thing, because if you can see maybe a brand in this sector over here is doing something that actually is working, could that translate to my brand in this different sector? I think it's always worth seeing what's going on, what's working, what are things you can steal, in the sense of, I'll go back to when I was at school. I was doing art and design, and I remember my art teacher saying, good artists essentially steal other people's work and then riff off the back of it. And any designer goes through that phase of you'll copy other people's work to get used to creating, and things that it's from a place of fondness of that person's work. I always remember copying cartoon characters in art classes as part of what we were doing, and there's a reverence because you enjoyed that cartoon or whatever. Then off the back of it, then you're developing your own thing. So I think it's about not copying to just like wholesale. You see people that copy a whole brand. I've got clients where they've got a product that sells globally, and their whole brand and operation has been copied in a far off country, and probably doing better because they've just literally ripped the whole thing off. So I think it's okay to look for inspiration. How do you then iterate off it in a way that can make it uniquely yours, and you don't want to go off the sort of the coattails of anyone else. So I think it's you're not even borrowing their legitimacy or whatever it is. It's you'll soon be found out if you're trying to sort of do it in the wrong way. I think.
But still on the line of authenticity and hype, right? Let's link it now to websites. Because you could say somebody has a strong website or a weak website.
Yeah.
But how do we actually define that? And can we relate it to the storytelling or the content on the website as well? And how do you think that actually affects investor opportunities? Because like you said, the investors actually check their company online. And then how do they say, okay, do you know what? They have a strong website or a poor website, or the storytelling is okay. How can they actually use that to judge authenticity or just hype?
I think first of all, like you say, investors are looking at different touch points. So your website is just one touch point. If it's not consistent with your social media profiles and the content that you're putting out elsewhere, it needs to be, it needs to have that consistency across the board. Then in terms of the content and the storytelling, from a practical point of view, every web page needs to achieve one thing. You're essentially taking someone at the top of the page and asking them to do something by the time they get to the bottom of the page. So you'll have your one primary call to action. So you're almost taking people on that journey down a web page, and if you can, it comes back to that understanding of your ideal client's problems. If you're speaking into it right from the start, you're hooking them in to them feeling like actually this is speaking to me. And from an investor point of view, I think it's the same. Is you're maybe answering different questions in their mind and say, to the customer in terms of problem, but they'll be looking for, is this a valid problem that you're trying to solve here, and are you articulating it in a very clear and concise way that not only your customers or potential customers can see, but me as an investor can see. Yeah, absolutely. Because if there's a load of waffle, and we're really good at over egging things and waffling, and the real I think the real skill with any copywriting, I'm not a copywriter, but is to whittle it down to the least amount of words that you can say what you need to say and still be effective, still bring in the tone of voice of the brand, still speak into those pain points, so create that sense of, the customer feels or senses that you have empathy with them and that they feel heard. And these are real skills to do. And obviously we've got things like, you can within, a couple of minutes whip up a website through any of these AI generation tools. But I think the real skill is to know who you are, what you do, how you do it, and who you do it for. And if you can very clearly see that from an investor point of view on a website, that will go a long way to help them actually catch you in, count you in, and say, okay, we'll go on to the next phase with this person. Okay. Might be having a quick call or whatever. Yeah.
So that means being very clear about who you are, what you do, and who you're trying to serve. It's actually important. So what? I know you've answered the question, but I'm just gonna ask anyway. But so what if you have a startup company and if you look at their website, their description, everything on the website is actually vague? Do you think that will instantly turn off the investors? Because
I think
everything is vague.
If you're trying to speak to everyone, you're speaking to no one. That's the key in these things. So you want to be, and this is why you need to know your ideal clients. So as part of the brand strategy process, we look at customer personas, and ultimately you want to be speaking to them, and that's where, going back to getting, we do a whole exercise with when we're speaking to brands customers of a day in their life. Nothing to do with the brand. We're just trying to understand what's a day in their life look like, to be able to see just what goes on for them, what some of the wider issues that they're dealing with. And so there might be patterns that you see as you talk to more of your customers that actually we thought this was the problem that we're solving here, but actually, having spoken to these, there's a whole layer down that's deeper, that this is the real problem we're solving. So being able to understand your customers as much as you can, and be able to speak into those problems is really key. And I think that's where things like your why come into it. Why are you doing what you're doing? It's actually you're trying to serve this group of people as authentically, as honestly as you can, and connect with them in a way that they feel heard, seen, and will be your biggest champions. So if you're speaking very broadly, you're not speaking to anyone, so no one will listen. It's like if you put out content on social media that is so broad, it's not going to stop the scroll, because people don't see this is for me. They just, that's not for me. I'll just carry on. So you have to know your customer first. That's the first protocol, I think.
But now we've talked about having weak websites, having vague information on the website, poor storytelling, and everything. The branding with the startup is actually poor. Right? So what if there's a founder who has a very lovely and strong personal branding, but the branding of the startup is poor? How do you compensate for that?
I think they just need to invest in it. That it's as simple as that.
I understand investing in it, but can that compensate for? Can their personal brand compensate for the weak startup brand? Because in relation to investor opportunities.
And maybe so, because as we said at the start, that initial thing is the investor's looking at the person. So if they've got a very strong brand, it depends at what stage their startup is in. I think if they're down the road and they're looking at Series A, Series B funding, that might be a bit of a signal around a problem with the brands, the startup's brands. But if they're earlier than that, and there's a little bit of a disconnect between the startup brand and their own personal brand, then I think most investors would see, actually, this is the person, this is the founder that I'll be investing in, this is what they're about, this is how they come across. It's very clear what their values are, all that sort of stuff. And just an aside on that, and again, this is another snippet of hearing from an investor where investors are now having to compete with even influencers who have money that they're looking to invest. Startups are now opportunities for those influencers that have money, and those new investors, if you like, are much quicker to make a decision to fund, which means more traditional investors are having to shorten the timescale they take to make a decision to fund. Otherwise, they miss out on opportunities potentially. So being able to boil it down to just spending time with the founder to get a feel for who they are, beyond just, I heard one guy talking about how he'll take them out for a meeting for food and just hang out for a bit, just to get a sense of, how they came across on, say, a pitch. What are they, how different or similar is that to when they hang out in person? The values and all that sort of stuff. So I think personal brand can really help, especially early stage, but at some stage it needs to align and be a bit more. You need probably more strength on the actual startup brand. It just depends where they are in their funding journey.
Okay, so but since we've talked about a founder with a strong personal brand, and then the personal brand is okay, but the startup branding is poor. So what are the fastest ways the founder can actually destroy their credibility, even though they have a strong personal brand now and their startup brand is really poor? What are the fastest ways they can actually destroy their credibility?
I think it's got to be a trust thing. Trust is the key.
And competence.
If they're making claims that they can't follow through on, I understand. There's that whole phrase of building the paper castle. I can't remember the exact thing, but you construct a paper castle and then you build the real thing behind it, and that takes a little bit longer. So I'm not talking about hustle culture or anything like that, but there's I think too much tension between what someone claims and actually what they can deliver on is never a good thing. I think just being quite honest about things, being honest with investors about stuff. You hear horror stories of where they startups will say they've got so many users. It turns out they've never spoken to a user, let alone So it's, I think you need to, most investors, I imagine, have processes in place to filter out stuff that's just not going to land with them. So just be real.
But assuming they are trying as much as possible to improve their brand credibility, what are the fastest ways they do you think they can actually do this? Is this through messaging or the storytelling on the website, or do you think it's through visuals, or do you think it's through positioning? What are the fastest ways they can actually improve the credibility of the brand?
I think it starts with the foundation stuff. So if they haven't done brand strategy, if they haven't worked out who they are, they probably know it in here. But brand strategy is about formally bringing it together, going through your purpose, going through the personality of the startup, looking at the people, so your audience, and then looking at positioning. So how do we position ourselves? We don't want to just be another X in a sea of X's. We want to be standing out over here. So I think that helps, that foundation, and it could mean, okay, our visual identity doesn't match with what we've just done with that foundation, so we need to change our visual identity or adapt it. Or it might be our website isn't really in line with this. So that process of doing brand strategy could lead to a number of different priorities going forwards. But if you don't do that brand strategy, you don't know what that priority is, because it's almost like you're just guessing. The strategy helps you get right into the guts of, this is what we're about. This is what our who our customers are. This is the problems they're facing. This is how we help that. And this is how we position ourselves, so that we're not like these other companies. So I think it's always a valid exercise to do, and it's an intense exercise. Don't get me wrong; it's a lot of time and effort in working it out,
but it's worth it.
Absolutely, it'll stand you in good stead as you grow as well.
All right, but because of time, right, we're gonna round off now. All right, so as a brand strategist, you're the expert here. What would you see about a startup, and do you make you feel like they are premium or cheap?
Oh, that's a good question. Premium or cheap? I think you can tell when a brand doesn't connect with its audience. So it just and I think founders will feel this themselves. There's a disconnect. It might just be a disconnect between stuff they're putting out online, the website, social media, the pitch deck, all that sort of thing. It just might not feel like it reflects who they are. And what, so I don't think it's necessarily about cheap or premium. I think it's about authenticity, yes. And it's that horrible word again, but it's true. If you want something that represents you, and it's like, if you Sticks of Rock, where they have the names all the way through, it's like, if you cut through any of our stuff, is it clear who we are? So I think it is that authenticity, and again, that comes back to working out. You have to work out who we are. And brand. There's another statement about brands. Brand isn't what you say it is. Your brand isn't what you say it is. Your brand is what your customers say. So if there's a disparity between the two, you need to listen to what your customers are saying, because you've got this gap. So it's authenticity, and just making sure that consistency then aligns across each touch point that you have. It could be whatever logo, it could be whatever color scheme. In some ways, it's the people connect with that emotional elements to the personality, the purpose of the brand, really, and how they experience you. So
okay. Well, because of time, I'm gonna ask you one more question. All right. So let's assume there's a startup out there, right? It doesn't matter whether it is early stage or later stage, okay? And they are worried about investors. They have a wonderful product. The founders are really, really smart. They know what they are doing. They think they have a good logo. They've not used AI. They have a wonderful logo. Their website is okay. The storytelling comes across that they know what they're doing, competence, authenticity, and everything. But still, you still feel like their branding is still weak. How can you help them?
I think it's doing a bit of a brand audit. It's looking at all those things that you've just mentioned, and if they've got that gut feeling that things aren't quite working together, okay, let's try and pinpoint where that is. So let's go through the sort of visual side of things, but also, okay, what is your purpose, and is it coming through here? What's your tone of voice? Is it coming through here? So you're creating almost a gauge and measuring against that gauge what you've currently got. And it might not be they need a full wholesale change. It might just be tweaking here and there, or doubling down on certain things. Often it's just iterations and looking at the subtleties that actually just bring that alignment.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for today. But Euan, before you go, where can the listeners, see if there's anybody listening to this today, and they are so interested in actually doing the brand audit? Maybe they already have a brand, but they think they need an audit, or they really need to come up with a strategy for their companies. where can they connect with you and learn more about your work?
Sure, yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn, so just under my name, Euan Lockwood, EUAN, and then Lockwood. I also have the branding studio is Kerf, KERF for foxtrot.co.
Okay.
So yeah, nice little short URL, so they can find me there.
All right. Thank you so much, Euan, for coming on the show. I hope you had a lovely time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Would you be happy to come back again?
Absolutely, yeah, always, yeah.
Hopefully we'll have you again.
Yeah, thank you.